right, so we have Brendan Schaub on George Janko's podcast talking about the haters, talking about not using social media, not reading comments, all the usual stuff. But there were a few good moments. Like, he did indirectly mention Mark Harley. Of course, he didn't say his name, but I'm pretty sure that's who he's referring to. It sounds like that situation because he mentioned a friend that he had that he gave a great opportunity to, and he blew it and he was ungrateful for it. So it sounds like he's talking about Mark there. And then he also talked a little bit about the LA comedy podcast scene and how it's changed since Joe Rogan's left. And then also it's pretty funny that George, he has on Schaub and he just had on Brian Callen a couple weeks ago. But it sounds like he's not really that familiar with them, which might be why Brendan wanted to go on the podcast, because he knew this guy wasn't going to bring up the truck walk or the Bobby Lee incident. I remember when Brian was on there a couple weeks ago, Brian brought it up, and George had no idea about the whole Bobby Lee situation, which is funny because George had his own problem with Bobby Lee, if you remember that. But George, he just doesn't seem that familiar with the whole Joe Rogan comedy scene. Like, it sounded like he wasn't even too sure if Joe Rogan even did comedy anymore, and he didn't know Joe Rogan ever did a special.
So he does stand up still.
Rogan?
Yeah.
Oh, big time, dude. Yeah, like arenas. Yeah, he does stand
up. What a career, bro.
He does more stand up.
He does more stand up.
He does more stand up than anybody you know. Yeah, go to Austin.
Does he have? He doesn't have a special though.
He has like 9 specials, dude.
Joe Rogan has 9 specials.
I think he has 3 on Netflix right now.
When did he?
He's been doing stand up for 30 years, but
wait, when was his last special though?
2 years ago, probably 3 years ago.
And then also, it sounds like he thought that Brennan started fighting and comedy at the same time.
So you got into stand-up and fighting around the same time?
No, I was fighting.
So it doesn't sound like he knows much about Brendan either, which I don't expect him to. But usually if you're interviewing somebody, you kind of do some research. But I think it might have made it better. Like, at one point, Brendan started talking about how he really wanted to get on Saturday Night Live. Like, that was his dream ever since he was a kid.
But my dream was to be on Saturday Night Live. Still is.
Really?
Still host Saturday Night Live. Yeah.
How come you've never even tried to maneuver doing Saturday Night Live? You're definitely.
I think I need to get more famous. Like, they just had, they have like Harry Styles doing it. I think I got some more work to do.
It's funny, that thought was even too delusional for Brendan Schaub to do anything with. You probably would have expected him to be like, the schedule didn't line up or just wasn't the right time. I wasn't in New York City at any good times or something. But at least he showed some humility here. He's just like, yeah, I'm not famous enough. I couldn't do it. All right, so now let's get to the part where Brendan starts talking about Mark Harley. Of course, he doesn't say his name, but it's pretty obvious that's who he's referring to. George, he starts talking about a friend that he had. He tried giving a great opportunity to. He said he was going to give him a lot of money, but the friend was ungrateful for it, and he turned down the offer, and George sounded like he was shocked by it. And Brendan's like, oh, yeah, I can relate to that.
He made it seem like it was insulting what I offered him.
Interesting.
And that shattered me.
Isn't that wild? When you realize how bad, like, I don't want to say he's a bad person. I don't know who you're talking about, but same thing. I've given people some opportunities and where it goes south for whatever reason. They take no ownership of it, and then it's like, oh, he's a bad guy. I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? All that I did for you? And then
they paint you as the villain.
Yeah. George, you shouldn't though, because you know you're a good person. Look at all these people. Like, sorry. You're a good person, so I don't care. It's like, yeah, all right, that's your narrative, and you want to run with it. It's like,
it's not
go
that I
do
care.
That. This is exactly why you're not here anymore.
It's just that you were my brother, or you were my sister, or you were my cousin in my eyes. So it's like, in my mind, it's like, bro, like,
it hurts.
It's funny that Brendan's saying, like, oh, he just wasn't grateful. He doesn't realize all the stuff I did for him. When Mark is basically saying the same exact thing about Brendan. Mark claims he's doing all this work trying to help Brendan out, and he wasn't really getting paid well for it, and Brendan promised him this big podcast that never really happened. So these two were just bad for each other. They probably should have never really worked together, but I'm glad they did because the whole thing is hilarious. So also on this podcast, we have Brendan and George talking about how Joe Rogan, he's always helped comedians around him. Comedy, it used to be cutthroat and comedians were just competing against each other the whole time. But Joe kind of changed that by promoting other comedians a lot and bringing them on his podcast and giving them a huge audience. But now that Joe's left LA, Brendan claims it's back to how it was. Everyone just being competitive with each other.
You have a good friend group.
That's amazing.
Great supporting group.
It's awesome to see people that are very successful wanting to make other people successful. It's very weird because this industry does have a lot of people that are like, no, it's me, not you.
Rogan started that. So that's the culture I came up in. That's why I pay it forward, because Rogan started that with, he'd bring Tom Segura. You look at the people he's brought on the road and made their careers, like Tom Segura opened up for Rogan, Joey Diaz,
oh wow,
Tony Hinchcliffe, monsters, dude. So he would always put these guys on and have them on his shows, and he was like, what's good for you is good for me. And he just built this supportive community, which in comedy it's never been done before.
Never.
Now that he left
Very
LA,
cutthroat
now
industry.
he left LA, it's back to the old days.
Really?
Oh, it's crab mentality now. Yeah.
It's funny that one guy leaves and it just throws everything off. You know, Brendan could be using that as an excuse as to why his podcast isn't doing well, but I think there is some truth to that. You know, they needed Joe there. He needed to keep things in order. Like, just look at Brendan and the whole Andrew Schultz drama, like all that. They went to Rogan for an answer. It sounds like that's probably usually how it is. Like, if two comedians have a conflict, they go to Rogan and he gives the final decision, like he's the judge. So these people without Rogan, they don't know what to do. But I think that needed to happen. You know, it is good that Joe's so supportive and he's helped out so many of his friends. But I think a lot of them just take what they have for granted. You know, they get giant podcasts, they get a huge audience from Joe, and they're just kind of content with doing the same thing everyone else is doing. You know, you just start your own podcast, you go on other people's podcasts, and you don't really need to do anything new. The formula's already there. Like, all you have to do is just stay friends with Joe Rogan. So I think it's probably a good thing now if people are more competitive with it, because then maybe we'll get some more interesting content. Like, at least Brendan provides us with this whole, like, reality TV show aspect of it all, you know, with all the drama going on, everything behind the scenes. I think that's pretty entertaining, but I don't know how many more times people can listen to a comedian go on another comedian's podcast and talk about comedy. But let me know what you guys think about it all. Make sure you leave me a comment on this video, and make sure you go check out my Patreon account. I just posted another video there about Howard Stern and High Pitch Eric and all that stuff. I also posted a video about one of the worst Joe Rogan Experience episodes. So if you want to see any of that, go check it out. I'll put a link in the description, and then make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you at the next video.